Today we are talking about CSS cascading, specificity, and the order of the CSS and how it all works together. So you can see I have this HTML in front of me, and we are going to try some things out and see what happens. So the basic principle behind cascading is that CSS can always be overwritten. So to figure out which property should be applied, there are a couple of rules which you have to keep in mind, and let's see what rules they are. So first rule is the order rule. So let's see an example of CSS orders in action. As you can see, we have a h1 tag which has a text. This is cascading example, and you can see it in the browser. It's here. And right now we are applying a font size 48 pixels and color blue to that particular h1. So, and now we are going to override that property by again defining the h1 CSS, and let's say we are overriding its font size. So as you can see, since the font size comes after the previous font size 48 pixels, it is overwritten. Here is the CSS. As you can see, we have two font size defined for a h1, and the last one, which is the higher one, 80 pixels, is taking place. So again, let's override some other properties and see. So now we are going to make this bold, and let's comment this out and see. As you can see, font weight bold has been applied, and let's see. You might notice the font size has become bold. Similarly, if you want to override a particular property which is not existing, you can again define that. And let's say find out. Now you can see the color has turned red from blue. If we go back and again comment out the color red, you'll notice the colors goes back. That's all for the order property. Order property is the simplest one out of the three properties which we are going to discuss, and let's move on to the specificity. So what is specificity? CSS specificity assign a weight to your every CSS declaration. As you can see, we have two CSS declarations here. First is class wrapper, which is having a class heading, and then we have the class heading. This is SCSS. The output CSS is any heading which is inside a wrapper, which is inside a CSS specific. This property is coming from here. And as you can see, then we have the second property called CSS specific dot CSS heading. So what do you think the outcome of this will be? Let's see. So these two headings are inside CSS specific div, and you can see one heading is directly inside CSS specific, and the other heading is inside wrapper div, which is also inside CSS specific div. So this CSS property defines that any heading which is inside CSS. So basically this property defines any heading which is inside a CSS specific div will have color red, font size 60 pixels, and font weight bold. As you can see, it's being applied to this part. Since our first heading is only inside CSS specific div, it's red and it's on the top, and it's coming here first in the HTML as well. So as soon as we define our wrapper heading, that is, as soon as we added any heading which is inside wrapper, which is inside CSS specific div, our second heading turns blue. And let's just remove it and see how what happens. You might see the CSS is updated. The previous code has been removed, and you can see our previously blue CSS has turned red again. Why? Because now it's just behaving as if this is just a heading which is inside CSS specific. As you can see, now we only have one declaration, CSS specific, having a heading. So this is being done here. Now let's just put it back and understand how it's working. So now you can see, as soon as we added a wrapper heading, it turned blue. So the way which CSS define which property should be assigned is called specificity, and it says that any CSS which is more specific can always override less specific CSS no matter the order. So if you have CSS defined in disorderly way, as you can see we have done here deliberately, we have wrapper heading before general heading, and you might notice it is overriding our red color property. And let's just go to our inspector element and see whether it's really overriding it or not. So you can see we have a heading inside CSS specific, and then we have a wrapper containing heading. Let's just see our wrapper heading. So you can see both of these properties are being applied, but the CSS having more selectors, that is, this one is more specific. Why? Because it defines that heading which is inside wrapper, which is inside CSS specific, should have color blue, and this one is less specific because it is defining that any heading which is inside CSS specific should be colored red. So this, no matter the order, CSS specific properties always override less specific properties, and the specificity is determined by the number of selectors you have in your CSS. So suppose if you have another heading which is inside heading div, if you add something like this in your HTML, you can see I have added sample heading here, and if you want to override this, then you can add one more class like this. So this will override your wrapper heading code which you have written. So the thing to remember with CSS specificity is any property which is more specific will override less specific property no matter the order. Let's move on to CSS inheritance. So let's just see our HTML first. You might notice we have our CSS inherit div. Inside this we have a para wrapper, and then we have a paragraph. Inside this we have a span. So, and let's see the basic CSS which we are dealing with. So we have basically styled our para wrapper having color red, font size 30 pixels, and font weight bold. So let's just see whether it's being applied. So you can see we have a para wrapper having font size 30 pixels and font weight bold. So you might notice that we have applied color, font size, and font weight property to our para wrapper. You can see the declaration is on font size para wrapper, but the text is present inside paragraph, which is present inside para wrapper. So how does this work? So there are a couple of properties in CSS which inherit their values from their parents, and this is the CSS inheritance. So properties like font size, font weight, font color, and couple of other properties which are defined in the CSS specification by default inherit their properties from their immediate parent. So what do I mean by immediate parent? As you can see in this case, our para wrapper is immediate parent for this paragraph, this sample paragraph. So this para by default will take the value which is defined for the para wrapper, specifically for anything which has to do with text and few other properties. Now as you can see, by default we have defined font weight bold here. Let's just say we want to assign font weight normal to a paragraph regardless of the property this paragraph's parent have. So as you can see, as soon as we applied the paragraph, this has turned into a normal text, and you can see it in the inspector as well. Font weight is normal. So let's just turn this back and see again. As soon as we remove it, it falls back to inheriting properties from its parent. Now let's say if you have property which is being defined by the CSS and you want to override that, so you can always define a particular property as inherit. As soon as we define it as inherit, you can see we have both font weight normal and font weight inherit, but due to the order, font weight inherit will apply, and inherit says that paragraph should take its properties from para wrapper or its immediate parent, which is in this case para wrapper. So similarly, you can see that we have a span inside this paragraph, and this span and the span is, as you can see, this is a span, and this span is inheriting properties from the paragraph. Now let's just say we want to override this spans property. We can just go back and define specific properties for it. So you can see, as soon as we applied para wrapper p, it's here. So that's how inheritance works. So basically, whenever you define a CSS property as inherit, it will take that particular property's value from its immediate parents. So the main thing to remember here is that the property will be inherited from its immediate parent. These are the basics of CSS cascading, inheritance, and order properties. And whenever you are writing CSS for any HTML, you should keep these properties in mind.